Thank you for dropping by to hear my talk. I'm Matt. I'm Tech Director for Sony Guerilla Games Studio in Hills Road, just south of the city. I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and this afternoon I thought it would be interesting to look back on my first game, Scooby Doo, looking at the game itself, the things we got away with then and would never do now, probably, the things that I'd rather forget about the game, and overall my lasting impression of that project as my first job in the games industry, how it grew me as an engineer, and why the hell I didn't run away screaming from it, and I'm still here 20 years later doing this talk. Okay, so a little bit about myself first. As I said, I'm currently with Sony's Cambridge studio. I oversee the code team there, and we're working on lots of exciting things that I'm hoping we can share with you all very soon. I'm 10 years into my stretch there, and this follows an earlier 10-year sentence at the now sadly departed Argonaut studio. Despite the hair loss, the last 20 years have given me the pleasure to work on several games with several teams and across several generations of consoles, from coding to technical production level. And here are some of the main highlights and lowlights. I'm hoping to be involved with the development of many more games to come in the years to come. As said, today though, I'd like to share some memories of the first title that I was involved with, and in some ways the title that comes with the fondest of memories, Scooby Doo Mystery on the SNES. So, Scooby Doo Mystery. Unsurprisingly, this is a title licensed from the popular TV cartoon show, Scooby Doo. It was published by Acclaim for the SNES, and for those too young to remember, that Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The game was released at the tail end of that console's life cycle in '95, just as the 32-bit era was starting. It's difficult to pin a genre on the title. It was a curious mixture of platformer, adventure, and mini game fest. I think the common day kids' speech would be mash-up or something like that. It was a US-only release, and I'm not sure of the exposure it actually got over here, so this talk's a good chance to address that. So again, this afternoon I'll be talking a little on the game mechanics, its development history, some of the team indulgences that made it into the game, and would likely never do nowadays. Some of the faux pas looking back that I'd personally rather forget. And last but not least, how that title shaped me as an engineer and as an industry professional, and why I'm still here 20 years on, doing the thing I love. Scooby Doo Mystery takes place across 4 episodes, each modelled on the classic cartoon series core episode loop. The template for each show is mysterious but nefarious goings-on are reported in a delete as applicable, remote, deserted or spooky location with an evil supernatural villain at the centre stage. For reasons completely unknown except to themselves, a gang of 4 kids, Velma, Fred, Daphne, Shaggy and his pet dog Scooby, decide to investigate. On arrival, they usually meet a villain who warns them away. And of course, this is advice that they promptly ignore, normally at the request of the inquisitive, nosy Velma, and they crack on with finding clues to help solve the mystery. This eventually brings to light the villain as being a foreman or a long-lost uncle or a janitor who's looking to exploit the land's gold or oil or property. And that's the general template. Sorry. In the game, the player controls both Shaggy and Scooby, looking for clues across the episode's locations, whilst trying to stay out of the way of the perils within. It's classic 2D platform controls, walk, run, jump, with a bit of acceleration and inertia. And there's some throwing, and there's some bashing. There are no head stomps or mushroom one-ups, though. It's not that sort of platformer. Throughout the levels, items can be found and stored in a 3-slot inventory, which hopefully you can just about see on the top right there. Some of these items will be clues, others are things needed to actually progress within the level. usually a key, but it could equally be an oddball progression helper, such as a bucket to cover a rat, or a fan needed to clear some troublesome leaves that are blocking the exit. We're also possibly the first game to implement a sniff mechanic. We have the tar monster you've met before, the pirate captain, the evil clown, and the evil count. And there are a few henchmen in there too, but I'll leave you to discover them all if you ever play the game. If you come across any of the hazards, your skirometer, which is the bar in the middle there, will go up. And once it's maxed out, Shaggy and Scooby get the hell out of there in fright. There you go. Along with the villains, we've got the usual dangers in the platform game of falling too far or being hit by harmful obstacles for self-harm if you so wish. Of course, the value of health can go up as well as down, with Scooby Snacks being the means to lower the bar in the game, as dished out by Daphne. And this was our way of cementing the idea that snacking is really good for you. So let's meet the gang. You have Shaggy and Scooby, of course, forever thinking about their stomachs and on the lookout for grub. However, in this game, Shaggy also has a hidden talent as a cartographer, mapping out the level as the player goes and having that info available on tap if needed. And then there are their three friends. We have Velma, the key character and driver for the story. Return items you found to her so she can crack the clues and solve the mystery. We have Freddy, who gives hints throughout the level, but whose primary role is at the end of the episode, where the clues are all in and the villain must be caught. And he does so via his showing you how to trap the villain via his blueprint. And finally, the lovely Daphne, who stands around looking pretty and dishes out Scooby Snacks to the guys as a reward, provided they've earned it. And as you can see, she's a pretty hard taskmaster. And that's the game. It's played through the episodes, exploring the locations, collecting the clues, avoiding the ghosts and villains, piecing together the mystery so you can build the trap and catch the crook. And that's repeated for 4 episodes. Additionally, as was legally compulsory for such games at the time, there are also a collection of random mini-games to find and enjoy. So we have the sandwich game. Try to catch as much food as you can within a set time limit, taking care to keep the plates balanced and not let the food slide off. We have whack-a-mole, again set within a time limit. Hit as many villains as you can, taking care that you don't hit your mates and trying to smack the bonuses for extra time and points. Finally, we have a helter-skelter game, which you can just about see down the bottom there. Get to the bottom of the ride, ducking and leaping the mines that seeming to have been carelessly left behind, and grab Scooby Snacks for extra points. So that's the game. What about the development history? So Scooby was developed at Argonaut on and off between January 95. Eventually releasing in September 95, and as I said, it was a stateside game only. The developing studio was Argonaut Games, a well-established London-based company, long gone now, but then very much at the forefront of world games development. Primarily known at the time for its focus on 3D technology, the company had gained exposure to Super Nintendo development through its work on the Super FX chip, as most notably seen in Star Fox and Yoshi's Island. We didn't use that chip in Scooby. Argonaut's presence in that console space attracted publishers for more traditional games development, and Argonaut had worked with THQ on a Ren and Stimpy game just prior to Sunsoft approaching them to do something with the Scooby license. These were the closing days of the 16-bit era, but arguably the best ones given some of the classics that were released, some of which are coming up now. So you have the Donkey Kong 1 and 2, and I know Donkey Kong 1 was technically 94, but it took me most of 95 to finish it. You have Killer Instinct, You have the first of the long-running Tales series of games from Namco, released at the end of the year. Chrono Trigger, one of my all-time favourites, and then the two Mega Drive classics, Vexor Man and Comic Zone. And last but by no means least, who can forget Yoshi's Island, another SNES title making magic with the FX2 chip that year. However, it was also very much a time when developer and players' thoughts were turning to sexy CD-based titles on the then new generation of 32-bit consoles. So you have the PlayStation at the bottom, the Saturn. The 3DO was still desperately clinging on with its fingernails. It was a transition period for the industry that many publishers and devs at the time didn't survive. Indeed, during Scooby's development, our initial publisher, Sunsoft, entered bankruptcy, with the title eventually being picked up for its release by Acclaim, who are now also sadly long gone, unfortunately. I'd like to think we weren't a curse though. Work on the game began in January '94. This was a three-man team, design, art and code, creating the initial design for the game and knocking up a quick prototype demo from some of the tech created for Argonaut's previous Ren and Stimpy title that I mentioned earlier. And tech's probably the wrong word. We didn't use things like Common Engine in those days. We're talking more about lifting the sprite animation code, the basic character map scroller, and chucking the Scooby and Shaggy sprite in there. I came on board shortly afterwards, joining the company in March as a junior coder. And at that stage, the game was little more than Shaggy and Scooby going through a run animation cycle against a two-screen scrolling backdrop. With the addition of a couple of other coders, artists and designers, we ran until February '95 to a point where we were effectively beta complete in new money terms. We had all the levels and cutscenes in, we were polished up, and we were pretty much ready for release. Before unfortunately getting the news that our publisher had folded and the game effectively cancelled with immediate effect. From memory, our initial projected release had been cited as Christmas '94, so we clearly overshot there, and that probably didn't help matters for Sunsoft. Again, though, I don't believe we were solely responsible for our publisher's overall demise. So anyhow, at that point, the team disbanded onto other projects on the then new platforms of the day, which are PlayStation and Saturn. As a coder, this was a pretty liberating time for me. I suddenly had megabytes of memory where previously there'd only been Ks. Processing power where I didn't have to wait 9 cycles for the results of a divide to come through. And a language in C that was almost human readable, almost. Additionally, the Saturn in particular brought a platform whose capabilities were very much an extension of the previous 16-bit consoles. So personally, I found there was good continuity there with a development environment I'd cite as being SNES++. Unfortunately, some of the initial dev documentation was still as obtuse to decrypt as the SNES's. I've got some of it here if anyone would like to look through. There's not much in it, though, between the two platforms. I spent a good couple of months producing PlayStation and Saturn demos in the name of research during this time towards one of our next titles, Creature Shock. And that game's another story entirely. Anyhow, at some point in June '95, we were called again into our MD's office to hear that Sunsoft's IP had been brought up by Acclaim. And following review of what they had, they wanted to release Scooby. Happy days. And then the realisation hit us that they wanted it as of yesterday. And with some minor changes made to it, things like the scripts and the overall map design and the levels flows, sort of minor, tiny things that change. And basically at that point, panic stations hit us. And we scrambled an emergency team together, dusted down the dev kits, and crunched like mad for the next 2 months to get things finished and through Nintendo's lot check. And that's the QA submission process we had to go through to get our game certified for its release. Anyhow, in September, we finally managed to release the game. And the team returned back to the brave new 32-bit world. On and off, we had 16 people involved with the title's development, with the peak size reaching 10 people for that final stretch in mid-'95. From start to finish, there was a nucleus of 5 people involved. some of us there. It was a team that learnt together, grew together, and made mistakes together. Our end makeup, our end game is very much something of a bygone age now in terms of its makeup, but also a product of an industry still finding cultural validity and reaching maturity in its development practices. Looking back, there are many things I can't believe we got away with, and I'd like to share some of those with you now. Actually, this is a slide I'm calling "We Did Get Away With It, Despite Those Pesky Publishers." These are the indulgences that, as developers, we allowed ourselves into the game, the legal minefields we were happy to risk walking across, and well, basically some of the things that the industry back then had yet to even realise were issues to front up to in development. So the case for the prosecution starts with the characters. So the characters presented good scope from some of those personal indulgences I mentioned, and we didn't really waste that opportunity at all. Let's look at some of our cast list here. We have the tar monster, Dean Drabwell, named after our producer, Darren Drabwell. The Funfair's evil clown, Mickey Mindang, loosely named after our lead animator, Jayad Mindang. The ghost ship pirate captain, One-Eyed Matt, also known as Captain Porter, modelled after myself with an accurate reflection of my eyesight. And finally, the Haunted Mansion's Count, Count Bagosi, also known as J.D. Morgan, who was our artist, Andrew. He was the inspiration for that character, but using Bagosi as the name of a vampire villain. I'm not quite sure where that idea came from, nor how it ever got past a legal department, if indeed we had one. So let's look at the script, Exhibit B, the script locations. There are team indulgences in here too. The Haunted Mansion's called Bradshaw Manor, named after Lindsay Bradshaw, one of our designers. And again, our producer, Darren, got a name check with a ranch location named after him. The first episode ship that One-Eyed Matt sailed in, that was the Red Ryan. Now, it's been suggested that football allegiances may have crept in there, but it's purely coincidental. And finally, on locations, we have another attempt at the dev team playing chicken with the legal department. The Funfair, that's Bing Bong Brothers, which may or may not have been inspired by a popular mid-80s, early 90s South Coast theme park. May have. So, sticking with that IP theme for a minute, let's move on to Exhibit C in the case of the prosecution, something I'm calling IP abuse. Again, there are a couple of examples here of things off the professional industry that we all now work in, where maintaining the integrity of the IP is completely sacrosanct in licensed product. For example, I'm pretty sure that placing Shaggy in a game where he's allowed to smack fellow mates and furry friends with a mallet might not get through things these days, even if we did eventually comply with Hanna-Barbera's request to put them in hard hats, with the exception for some reason of Scooby. He's still unprotected there. So there's not a lot of love for Daphne there, clearly, and it doesn't get any better for her. Consider the attire that we put her in versus her in-show clothes. I'm pretty sure it's not the resolution here that's changed the colour of her dress, hair, shoes and scarf. And actually this was something I only realised was an issue through Googling the game for this talk. I don't recall this ever being an active discussion during the game's development. It's clearly palette limitation or colour blindness that's caused it. But again, I'm pretty sure we'd not be allowed through to release with something so fundamentally out these days. Let's move on to Exhibit D, which is the end credits. So, desperately fighting the limits of a 2 megabyte cartridge to cram in all of the game's code, animations, locations and audio, we thought it a great idea to take the shots of the team in cowboy outfits that you saw a little while back and then turn them into an 11-screen credits end sequence extravaganza with each screen featuring a cameo team pick. And here's some more examples of us looking a bit younger. Sorry. And when I was younger, I probably could have done that a lot faster. And whilst we didn't compromise the game in making that sequence actually fit, it did our hair loss no favours at all. It's complete indulgence on our part. And again, if making the game today, I think our priorities might be slightly different. The Cowboy dress-up team shot day was a great day out, though. Okay, here's the wall of shame for the game. Some of the items I'd rather forget or wish we'd changed. The first observation going back to the game is the size of the player characters and the environments we place them in. They look great, but they're not conducive to delivering a tight, precise platforming experience where you really want to give the player maximum visibility of where they're going, whatever their speed. Play this game at full pelt and you can be running off of ledges or right on top of enemies before you know it. It didn't help that many of the areas were badly signposted, and just for good measure, there's a couple of really dodgy collision volumes that we seem to have left in there. It all adds up to quite a frustrating experience in some sections of the game, which is really unfortunate given the team's love of platformers and the inspiration that we all took from some of the classics you saw a bit earlier. Those levels would definitely have benefited from more iteration and play testing, and perhaps a design approach that better fitted a slower paced playthrough, perhaps a puzzle-based approach akin more to Lost Vikings or Trine.
Did you make that more difficult for yourself with momentum and inertia on the character?
Definitely,
as well?
definitely, yeah. I think with a full sprint cycle, Shaggy and Scoob can get to just about the right-hand side item. Mm-hmm. So that's your window there. So you've got to be... even know what's coming up or have incredibly good reactions. But yeah, we didn't do ourselves any favours there. I think the only way we could have made things worse would have been if we decided to play some of those levels in the dark, actually, which we did too. So you've really got to play the majority of this thing at a slow, measured pace, rather than at the more frantic slapstick levels that the cartoon's renowned for. My full apologies to anyone who's played the game and lost control of his hair or the will to live. Scooby is a collect to progress pseudo-adventure game, a game where you have to collect and combine items to progress in the levels, similar in vibe to old school titles such as Dizzy, Pyjamarama or Spellbound. As popularised by the 8-bit machines some of us all grew up with on the Spectrum and Commodore 64. I think it's customary in such games to have an element of illogical object placement and contrived combination chains. For example, I'm not quite sure what Mr. Dizzy plans to do with a protected species and a tube of toothpaste here. The mind boggles. But those are the sort of items rife in the games of those times. And again, we took this opportunity to follow where others had previously led, and we ran with it. So we end up with objects and placements such as our ghost pirate captain's teddy bear. We asked the player not to question why a hardened criminal might want a cuddly toy, or especially one that's conveniently being kept on top of a hard-to-reach box of crates on the foggy top deck of a ship. We have a fan left on top of someone's porch. I'm not sure how the original owner was intending to use that, nor how he got it up there in the first place. And we have a barrel of TNT, just left lying around by a duck chute in a children's fairground. Health and safety clearly had the day off. I won't reveal what any of those items are for. My favourite puzzle in the game is one set in the circus level, which sees players having to retrieve something hidden within a test your strength machine. This is the classic smack with a hammer to see if you can hit it bell thing that you see in fun fairs or used to. In a blatant attempt to stretch out the gameplay, we asked the players to first find the machine's key items, the hammer and the actual bell donger, that's the technical name for it, and then put them together to assemble the machine, like you normally have to construct fairground attractions before you use them. Right? Once that's done, they need to sniff out and improve your strength manual, which is logically just left lying around in the grass, which on reading magically imparts its knowledge and benefits to the reader in a nanosecond, instantly giving Shaggy the strength to lift the hammer. I want one of those books. When you do eventually get to use it, as is customary for such attractions, a key magically falls out of the bell. We didn't explain how that key got there, nor why it wasn't hidden in some place where it might have actually been accessible, something left field like the myriad of drawers and cupboards we had lying around. In this day and age, we're not so random, and we strive to keep things coherent in our games with what the player would actually expect of the world when designing our levels. And yes, it's often a duller place because of it. Finally, we come to audio. The choice of audio cues for common player actions is vital to get right in a game. These are the sounds that the players will be hearing on and off for hours if they've invested time with your title. And let's hear a few examples, courtesy of DJ Scooby. Sorry. I'm probably showing my age there, but I heard there's some games you recognise, including the Windows volume control.
Classic.
If you've immersed yourself within a game, again, these are the noises that embed themselves in your psyche, repeating as earworms when you think about the title. That's if the developer has got things right. If they didn't, that earworm's likely to be the noise of the volume control being turned down to zero, or of a favourite music track that you've had on your stereo and playing to drown the noise of the game. We were somewhere in the middle, but listening back, some of our cues were, if not awful, just downright bizarre. Let's take a few references here from Mario. So for Mario's boing, jump, and pipe classic audio loop, we had the drum, beat, rum, and sneezy leap. And for the fire flower, throw, and turtle impact sounds, we had the gong being hit really hard smash. And this played whatever you hit, so be it rats, birds, small children, whatever. The thing just played to infinity. And finally, for the classic Mario death theme, we have the Scooby Snigger. So if you've played the game with the title with the sound down, I fully understand why. Annoyingly, though, you would have missed out on some absolutely fantastic music, which, revisiting, still stands out as completely perfect for the title and actually stand out for the platform itself. I will turn the audio down. That's not the music. But let's take a minute out to enjoy some of the game's tunes. Or not. Hope you agree, some fantastic work there that the guys did. So, things that Scooby's taught me. This is my lessons learnt slide. Scooby was a somewhat chaotic project with a couple of false starts, lots of stress, and coming with a really, really steep learning curve for someone new to the industry. I was basically handed this on my first day, which is SNES development manual, and told to get on with it and make a game happen. My knowledge of the SNES up until that point has amounted to little more than how to get my US copy of Castlevania running on my PAL kit. Coming from a background of structured, well-planned, well-documented, high-level avionics software development, this was a little daunting, to say the least. It was nothing like my degree had promised me as a career in software engineering should be. I really should have asked my money back then, I guess. So why didn't I run a mile? And what did I learn from teacher Scooby? And what made me come back for more pain beyond the project? First lesson, games development is fun. That background of well-organised avionics development I spoke of just now suddenly looked very, very dry. The career path I planned to happily see through to retirement, it became very, very boring the instant I walked into Argonaut's Collindale office. Being given the remit and trust to put into practice a creative vision, to commit your imagination and personality into something tangible, to be able to share that output with people, to get their feedback, good and bad, and be able to respond to it. To have the chance to take your hobby as a fully fledged games-playing nerd geek into work, to be able to carry on your weekend debate over which character's best to pick in Street Fighter or whether Sonic's better than Mario, all while sat at your desk on a Monday morning alongside your work colleagues. To have access to libraries of games and consoles for the purpose of reference in your job. To actually be paid for it, well, that was absolute gold dust to find. And 20 years on, it's that proposition that keeps me going through those deep winter late-night milestone crunches and end-phase bug hunts that we sometimes still have to go through in effort for our art. Games development is fun. And it's Chun-Li and Mario, by the way, if you're interested. So the next lesson learned, games development is challenging. At a purely vocational level, as an engineer, I learned more about my craft in 6 months at Argonaut than the previous 6 years in academia and public company embedded systems development had taught me. Away from the readable Ada and Fortran source code, itself distilled from many, many years of design documentations and reviews, away from the testbed harnesses and the structured, regimented test cycles, software development suddenly became very, very hard. I was at the metal with assembler from day one on Scooby, with my only means to get the machine's attention being at a register and port level. And as we didn't have any form of usable in-house debugger, my only route to see what said machine was thinking was through on-screen outputs, be it the game itself, of course, as one example, but also often having a recourse to poking characters to the screen or flashing the TV board as different colours to show diagnostics. I had to think on my feet and find solutions to issues that I may have previously relied on others to help with. These were also the days, though, when game submissions to the platform holders, Nintendo in our case, were costly and could take months to organise, and where that review stopped at the first error they found. And I think our first submission actually failed with a missing copyright on the title page. They actually hadn't bothered to test anything else. So looking back on the game, it gives me a renewed appreciation of the safety nets that we enjoy today within our development environments, with our cross-platform high-level abstractions, our feature-rich debuggers and profiling tools and runtime assertions and automated test cycles, etc., etc. And yes, it also gives me an appreciation of some of those dry and dull best practices I was taught in academia. But more importantly, it's a title that taught me the importance of always striving for quality in your work and the aspiration to get things right first time. And you may not hit those goals, and I often don't, but your mindset needs to be with it. There's always another challenge ahead that you need to be ready for, such as managing multi-threading in this day and age. And finally, the most important lesson. Games development is all about the teamwork, and yes, it is a cliche for sure, but as in many areas of life, whoever worked with me on that, but as in many areas of life, by working together we can achieve something far greater than the sum of our respective parts. The Scooby team was a diverse mix of people, all human, of various disciplines, sexes, ages and experience levels, who came together almost randomly in effort to make a game. All of us though shared a common love in gaming and a desire to want to make video games that others could enjoy. We worked together in hot, cramped conditions, at times almost on each other's laps, against tight timelines and through sleepless nights and days, where good diet was an alien concept and personal hygiene was often something best left unmentioned and unsmelt. We were tired and stressed, and it was often argumentative and moody, and we should really have hated each other. But we didn't. We had full remit to pretty much do what we wanted within the boundaries of the license and our deadlines and the platform. It was a creative and fun environment, and I refer back to lesson 1 there. One where we enjoyed constructive debate and discussion of our work, and one where we riffed off of each other to make things happen. So I remember the ship level went through a phase where we were putting rats everywhere for some reason as an obstacle. There's still plenty of them in that level when you play the game, and some of them sneakily just become parrots. But one phase, they were rife. It went through the first screen, scrolled right, there was a rat. Through the next door, there was a rat. Up onto the top deck of the ship, rats everywhere. So for reasons that escape me now, we also had a bucket as a collectible object in that level. And I think that was originally intended as a clue. Anyhow, one evening I build the latest code and data, and I see that a new area has been added to the ship, and yes, there's a new rat that's been added, going left and right and doing its ratty thing. And I decided I've had enough, and my ratometer has gone into absolute meltdown at this stage with the game. So just for my own personal amusement, I decided to enable collision detection between rat and bucket, so as to produce a moving bucket when those two items are combined. It's not in the game design or schedule, and I'm not even sure we actually had a schedule in those days, but I left that functionality enabled, and I checked in the code, and I went home and I promptly forgot about it. Now, a couple of mornings later, I came in, and the QA guys accidentally found this rat bucket combination, and is now showing the level guys. And by the end of that day, bucket rat had become a thing. That section script had been completely reworked to include it as a puzzle, and the audio guys are readying a rat under bucket squeak effect. So the original plans for the bucket are long forgotten, and the rat's still got a state of execution, unfortunately. But anyhow, that's a really, really small example of the synergy that can happen in a strong game dev team, where the best features aren't always planned or scheduled, where the real magic is often found through bouncing ideas off of each other. As a team, we came out of the Scooby experience completely knackered, but bonded as a group, in tune with each other's strengths and weaknesses, and ready to start the next thing. Lifetime friendships have been formed. Scooby was the first title that showed me the value of teamwork to make things happen in games development, and the worth in taking time to foster a good team spirit on a project. I've seen that pattern repeated several times in my career, and I've also seen on the flip side where the team ethos has been forgotten and projects have either failed completely or been incredibly painful to realise. A dev team made up of individuals who are receptive to each other's viewpoints, who engage with each other, who champion, critique and push each other. And even if not always on the same wavelength, a team that empathises with each other. That team simply makes better games. And that concludes my talk. Again, thank you for dropping by to listen. Does anyone have any questions?
That can be a poison chalice, can't it? although you've got a lot of the work already done for you with the character development, etc., the fans of the franchise have got a level of expectation that you've got to meet.
Yeah, we went into that effort as fans ourselves. So I think we were very much playing this, designing this, thinking about this thing as watchers of the show. So it made it a little bit easier. As I've hopefully shared with you there, the thoughts of policing the license or being concerned about the do's and don'ts and things we got wrong with the characters were hardly in our minds at all. So, which is a good and bad thing. So, but we weren't daunted by that at all. You know, it wasn't a burden for us.
Yeah. You're right about Yoshi's Island, by the way. It's brilliant. So how much help did you get from Hanna-Barbera? Because I've interviewed the people who made Total Recall, and they got absolutely nothing, no pictures of the character, no story or anything. And I've spoken to the guy who did the Family Guy pinball machine, and he got more than he could use. He got permission to use any clip from any episode. They sent him gigabytes of sound. So where were you on that scale?
It's interesting because on one hand we had, I forget the second name, but Casey Kasem. I think he was in.
Shaggy, didn't he?
It is, yeah, I won't try and do that noise. But yeah, but he came in to record. So he did some of the sound bites there, but on the flip side, as you've seen, we got very little, if any, reference to Daphne, or what we got was wrong, clearly. Yeah. So we've got little input on the script. We didn't really need it, but I'm surprised we had such little buy-in with them. Most of our stuff was grepped from the TV show and scanned in. And there weren't too many questions we had on the characters. Obviously, they're everywhere on the TV, so there's a lot of reference there. At the end, they obviously had to give sign-off before we released it, but we got away with a lot. And had a,
we would have got away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids.
Exactly. So, yeah, they were there if we needed them, but we didn't.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? Anybody got any questions? Just stick your hand up.
Andrew. Sorry? Seems odd. Yes, well, the claim was, both of the publishers were US based. I think the phase where it came in was at the end of the life cycle here. I think there's only a handful of titles beyond 95 I can recall getting released in PAL, or at least big titles on the SNES. I think the only one that comes to mind is Donkey Kong Country 3, which is 97. So the market here was very much changing towards PlayStation. In fact, 95 was the year of the PlayStation release here. Saturn was obviously had come out, so we were hitting with our late arrival quite a decreasing audience anyway. I think the US obviously gave them the biggest audience group. I guess at that stage, when it was ready, it didn't make sense, or they didn't have the money to put out the marketing for a European, and plus the PAL localizations that would have had to come with that. So I guess a little bit earlier, we may have got in, but as it was, well, at least we got made in the States, right?
How different was the palette from the PAL version? So you may have got the colours right.
We didn't do the PAL. We didn't touch it. We weren't asked to, but yeah, we may have got the colours right for that. And we didn't have patching, obviously, so we can't go back and fix things.
Gary had a question.
I was just wondering, what was your favourite machine to work on? Was it SNES, or was it one of the other machines?
I think the SNES, obviously, there's some fond memories there for all of us around that platform. But the Saturn was by far the most challenging machine. And again, I've got it over there, but the manual for the SNES is double the size for the Saturn, and it's hard to find your way around that, but it's just full license to play with the hardware and make what you want happen. And the Saturn was the most challenging in terms of what I was asked to do on it. So I did Croc on the Saturn. So that one by far is my favourite. And of course the Vita and Sony platforms that we work on that. Oops.
Our host Jason has got a question.
What was your first experience of video games?
Good question. I think it was playing the VCS or 2600 Space Invaders around a neighbour's house. Just going, this is what I must do.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah, that was the thing that flipped it. And then beyond that point, you know, that was the early 80s and the golden time for arcades. So as a kid growing up, 11, 12, every week you could walk down the arcade and find a new machine there. It's joyous time. But yeah, the VCS was my first exposure.
If you had...
So yeah, can I just add on to that? So the VCS, Space Invaders,
Yeah.
and arcade Space Invaders, VCS, was rubbish in comparison. Did that make any difference to you?
No, well, I mean, I hadn't seen the arcade one, so that was like magic, something moving on a TV screen, and yes, I could move it and fire, and well, it's a discussion point, another debate, I guess, but it had invisible enemies, and the arcade version didn't. It had 112 variations of gameplay versus the arcade's one, so you know, it's debatable whether or not it's not any better, but yeah, I think as a kid, anything there at that stage that you got a chance to play was captivating. I think I probably couldn't reach the arcade controls at that point either until now.
If you had to review the game now, looking back, what would you give it for, say, graphics, sound, and gameplay as a percentage?
Straight tens, of course.
10%.
It's not quite BAFTA territory. No, it's a mid-70s. I think, you know, it's not fantastic. It's worth playing, but we've done better. But I think in terms of reflecting the development team's personality, it is very much something you don't see enough of these days. So it's still worthwhile playing, an enjoyable experience.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Right, you've got a 2-week sprint. What would you change in order to get it out the door? Now that you've played it, you know it, what would you change to make it a better game?
2 weeks? I'll probably...
2 weeks.
Yeah, it's great. Well, what we should do is just change the first level so that it's like an endless sequence of collect a key, unlock the door, collect a key, unlock the door, and spin that out maybe for like at least 5 hours of gameplay and then put a game over screen at the end.
I love it.
But seriously, there's not an awful lot we could do in 2 weeks. I think we would go back and tighten up the dodgy collision. You wouldn't necessarily be able to change the pace of the game that late on because you'd have a huge amount of work to do with the sprite animations, but at least tightening up the platform section so we could get some more signposting in, fix up the collision. That'd be the things to aim for. Just make it as good as it could be.
Ian, another question?
Yeah, if you had the ability to pick any franchise apart from Scooby Doo to make it into a SNES game, what would you pick?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I like that the Hanna-Barbera are classics, aren't they? There's probably something more of our time than nowadays, but those do stand out. So things like Wacky Races, but I think would make it in. But I'd like to actually go a little bit more left field, being someone from England, and look at some of the classics that we grew up with as childhood. So maybe Rainbow the license. You know. You know. Zippy versus Bungle. Yeah, so something like that would appeal. Let's just playing with it.
On the SNES, you'd have to have green blood, though.
You would, it's unfortunate. Well, I don't know what colour Bungle's blood was, so yeah, we might get that.
We could find out. Any other questions? Yep.
Freed.
Can you put some rats on
It's in there. Haven't you tried it? No, yeah, I think, we'll try and find some way of contriving a Hellgast bucket combination, definitely.
Yeah.
Anyone?
How many lines of code went into the game?
It's probably in the order of 2,500 to 3,000. It's assembler, so you've got no macros. It's pretty verbose. I remember that I printed out my first weekend. I went in and printed out the existing control routines there, and it was pretty much in the order of that sort of size for printouts. I had some sort of fantasy that I was going to go over the weekend and try and debug something on paper, but that disappeared as soon as I got off the train. But yeah, it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot.
You said about the smaller team and being involved and being able to put your input directly into the game. Is it less of a personal experience now you have a bigger team and you have so much restriction on what you're allowed to do?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's. I think we've still got the input. We still enjoy the input, but there's a lot more people feeding into the creative vision. So your input, your strong idea may get distilled. It certainly get debated and changed and refined. So in a way, it's harder to get your own individual voice heard in games nowadays, and that's a shame in some ways, because there's very few games now where you pick them up and you can get the author's personality. And I think probably the only ones that stand to mind is Mr. Minter. He's still doing his stuff, and you can pick up a Jeff Minter game these days and just get what Jeff's about through playing his games. And we have lost that as a development industry in the main. But the flip side of that is often your ideas are crazy or mental, and some of the stuff, you know, it doesn't work out, or it really shouldn't work out. Yeah. Or it could do with a second opinion, should we say. So we do enjoy that, I think. And now, with so many people feeding into teams, we enjoy the combination of ideas, changing something small or really focus into something much broader through active discussion and debate. So it's not a bad thing, it's just a different space. I think there is scope nowadays, certainly in the early 2000s, it was more a sanitised industry, I think. I think there was less scope to get your voice heard, less scope to get your personality out into games. Nowadays, things have come full circle to a degree. We've got more opportunity for indie games development, more publishing platforms such as Steam. So there is that space. There is that space to have personality and to show yourself in the games. But in the industry and the teams that we work in now, not so much, unfortunately.
Final question before we wrap up, anyone? Ben?
So you told us what you did get away with and what you shouldn't have got away with. Is there anything you didn't get away with that you put in there that somebody looked at and said, absolutely no way?
Yeah, there was, well, other than the hard hats were, that's enough, and that's enough, guys.
Scooby doesn't have human rights, by the way, that's why you didn't
That's good answer. We did, I do recall spending a month and a half working on it was an isometric rafting mini game, which actually didn't make the cut. And it was going, we'd spent about a month on it, and it was the main game was sat there still waiting to be written. What we'd actually signed up and promised we'd deliver. We'd put aside, and we're spending this time on this kind of like tubing light, Shaggy and Scooby in a canoe game, and iterating over that and just playing with that as a game. And I do recall that the producer then came in and said, "Enough's enough, guys. You're playing too much with stuff," which is kind of completely off-piste. Just get on and finish the game. So within the development environment, yeah, there were checks and measures that did happen, but not so much at the publisher end. No, we had a lot of freedom there.
Right, well, before we all go and get another beer from behind the bar, which is just £3 a pint, and make your way back for the final speech of the day, we've got time to thank Scooby Doo, of course, and Matt Porter.
Thank you.